Hey guys, welcome back to Coach Hall Writes. In today's video, I'm going to be answering the most asked questions I get about the AP exam. So let's talk about the paper test specifically. So in 2021, this is the test that's on May 12th. Basically, what you need to know is that for the paper test, you can actually move around within a section. So that means the multiple choice or the essays. You do them one at a time, so you don't have access to the essay questions at the same time as your multiple choice. But you can navigate in between multiple choice questions. The students who are taking the digital test unfortunately don't have this option. They're not allowed to go back and answer questions that they've already passed. So because of this, you can use that to your advantage if you're taking the paper test. So one tip I have, and this won't work for everyone, so try it out before you actually take the test to see if it helps you, is you could read the question stems, which is like the actual question. Don't read the answer choices. And that way it helps you know what you're looking for before you actually read the passage. So you're reading intentionally, not for entertainment. So looking at the question stems first can help. And some of the questions are going to say things like in the first paragraph or in lines 20 to 25. So you can actually bracket that off on your paper test and put maybe like the number of the question next to it. That helps you make sure that you're answering the right part. It also makes it go a little bit faster because you're not having to scan for certain lines. So for some students of mine, that has really helped. Other students have said it's a process that they don't really like. They prefer to read the passage first. So just an option, do what works best for you. Generally speaking, you don't want to linger too long on any one particular multiple choice question because there are 45 questions. You have 1 hour to answer them. So essentially, since it's 45% of your composite, each question is worth 1 point. So we don't want to spend too much time on one question and then have to rush others that we might actually be able to get right later on. You also want to make sure that if you find a multiple choice passage particularly hard, that you consider moving on and coming back to it. This is only if you're taking the paper test though. Now remember, you still have to line everything up on your answer key. So if you're going to skip a question or even skip a passage and then go back to it, make sure that as you progress, you're answering the correct number on the correct answer spot on the bubble sheet. Also, just in general, since there's no penalty for guessing, don't leave any answers blank. If you run out of time and you have to guess and bubble in something in the last minute, don't try to make a pattern with your answers. Just choose one letter and bubble that letter in consistently. So make a straight line. And it is, I believe, urban legend that C is the most popular answer choice. I've actually heard A and D are generally more popular, but that's just a suggestion as well. So choose a letter and then bubble down. Don't try to make a pattern. Now let's talk about some strategies you can use for the essays on the paper test. So I recommend having a tentative plan of attack. For the digital test, you're not going to be able to go back and answer an essay question after you've already passed that essay question. But for the paper test, you do have a little bit more freedom and mobility when it comes to answering these questions. So the order you're going to see them on the paper test is synthesis, rhetorical analysis, and argument. However, because it's rolling time, you can technically answer these questions in any order that you want to. So when we say plan of attack, there's a couple things that you can consider. First of all, you technically don't have to spend the whole 15-minute reading period actually reading. You can start writing your essays during that time. So if you want to start with synthesis, usually you want to spend 10 to 15 minutes reading and annotating those sources, and also perhaps planning your essay. Now, if you only spend 10 minutes of the reading period working on synthesis and then start writing, then in theory, you've banked 5 minutes that maybe you could put towards, say, rhetorical analysis. So just keep that in mind. You're going to be cued by the person administering your test at different intervals. They have a script to follow, but technically speaking, you can kind of customize the test however you want to. Another option for your plan of attack is to get a lay of the land. So some students feel like they're equal at all essay types. It just depends on what the prompt is actually asking. So for these students, it might be beneficial to just look at the essay questions on the paper test and kind of see what topics you're going to be assessed on, and then make an order based on which ones you feel you can answer best. I recommend prioritizing the essays that you think you can actually do well on because you want to make sure you have enough time to complete them as satisfactorily as possible. So getting the lay of the land is one method. Now, if that's going to stress you out, then don't choose that plan of attack. Other students might feel that they're really strong at a certain type of essay. So they might feel like they're going to have their best chance at a higher score if they prioritize that essay first. So these are all things to consider. It's very individualized. You don't have to have a very in-depth plan of attack because it could change based on what the prompts are and how you're feeling that day. But it is important to recognize that you might have strengths and you might want to play to those strengths on exam day. So again, just to be clear, for the paper test, you're able to answer the essay questions in any order that you want to, not the digital test. That has a set order. Another tip would be to use all of your time. So some students often ask, like, how much time do I need to reserve for editing? And in my personal opinion, editing can be beneficial in some instances, but usually spelling and grammar don't impact your score, so you really want to be focusing on generating content. Now, if you do have time left over, then absolutely go back and proofread. You can even go back and add more content. So if you realize that one of your claims was underdeveloped, maybe it needs more commentary, if you're doing the paper test, you can do a little asterisk, like a little star, where you want to make that addition, and then if there's no room to put it there, go to the end of that essay, put another star to indicate that they match up, and write it there. You can also draw arrows and write little notes to your reader. I've even seen kids renumber paragraphs because they wanted it read in a different order. So as long as it's clear to your reader, they're going to read the essay in the way that you intend. So if you have extra time, don't just sit there, please. Use your time effectively. So make sure that you have enough content, enough commentary. Make sure that your essays are the best representation of what you've learned this year and who you are as a student writer. For those taking the paper test, it's also important to recognize that the person reading your essay is not going to read anything that you cross out. So you can actually just do a strike through, just do a line through the sentence or sentences that you don't want them to read. You don't actually have to cross out so much that you're scribbling on your page because number one, this looks kind of messy, and number two, it can actually be really distracting to the other people in your testing room. So don't waste time trying to black it out so no one can read it. Just do a strike through. They're not going to read it if it's clear you don't want them to read it. So now let's talk about some questions that are more test specific, not just paper test specific. So one of the most popular questions I'm asked is, how many paragraphs do I need? And in general, this varies depending on your writing style, how much time you have, and how you're pacing. So here are some general tips. You want to have an intro paragraph, yes, but we don't want it to be long and fluffy. So I recommend having 1 or 2 sentences of context and then your thesis. A long intro doesn't really benefit most students. You are actually better off saving that time and energy for your body paragraphs. If you can't think of any context and you're taking the paper test, just write a defensible thesis. You can actually skip a couple lines before you do that and then go back to it. Now, if you're taking it digitally, you should be able to just kind of put your cursor there and add more information. So it is okay to skip a couple lines and leave room for context in case you want to go back and fill that out. Now, for those taking the paper test, while you can skip the first couple lines of your essay and go back to it, don't actually alternate lines on your essay because that wastes paper. You want to just make sure you're writing it normally, indent your paragraph so it's easy to read. So in terms of paragraphs, quality is more important than quantity. So in many cases, if students only have time to write 2 developed body paragraphs, that's okay. Just make sure that you have plenty of commentary. There are plenty of students who unfortunately don't finish because they've run out of time. The essays are viewed as a rough draft, so don't stress about not finishing, just do your best. But I would honestly prefer my own students write 2 really good body paragraphs instead of 3 mediocre ones, because I want them to really hit a home run in at least one of their body paragraphs. And that comes from development, not rushing your paragraphs. For students who struggle with pacing, it's important to recognize that conclusions are nice but not necessary. Now, if you can pace to write a conclusion and you feel it would add value to your essay, absolutely do so. At the very least, most students just try to restate their thesis, but if you can, think big picture, zoom out, really dig into those implications, and end with the broader scope of things if you can in your conclusion. But if you can't get to that conclusion, it is okay. Personally, I think the body paragraphs are more important, so don't feel bad if you don't get to the conclusion. Because of the time constraints, the essays are actually viewed as rough drafts. So it's just really important to remember that you need to do the best you can given the time constraints. It's easy to put a lot of pressure on ourselves knowing that there's the potential for, let's say, college credit on the line and things like that. But remember, you've never seen these prompts before and you only have roughly 40 minutes per essay. So it's important to make sure that you are not being too hard on yourselves If it's a really hard prompt, don't let that make you feel defeated before you've even finished the essay, because oftentimes students actually end up doing better than they think they do. And so we want to make sure that we're putting the most effort we can into each essay, really developing those paragraphs, and then let the scores be what they are. Don't stress about it as you're taking the test. Another common and perhaps more practical question is, what do I need on the day of the test, and how long is the test exactly? Generally speaking, I recommend that you bring at least 2 pencils for the multiple choice, and then perhaps 2 pens, either blue or black ink, for your essays. Some schools provide this, but it's always good to have backups just in case. And then you're also given a quick break in between the multiple choice and your essays. So sometimes the school will actually let you have a quick snack during that time. So just double check with your school to make sure it's okay. I know some schools actually provide a snack, so just kind of figure out what the policies are at your school. For those taking the digital test, you're going to need your device. It's going to need to be properly charged. And you also want to use the different resources from the College Board to make sure that your device and your browser and everything is compatible. And then if you're taking the test at home digitally, then you want to make sure you have a quiet workspace. As far as the time constraints, the first portion of the test is going to be the multiple choice section. So for this section, you have 45 questions that you have to answer in 60 minutes. Now, the second half of the test, that's going to be the essays, or the FRQs, free response questions. So you get a 15-minute reading period for AP Lang, and then they recommend 40 minutes per essay. So this amounts to 2 hours and 15 minutes total for the essays. Inevitably, as the exam gets closer, I see more students wondering how to earn the sophistication point. So I've actually done other videos on this that go in depth for rhetorical analysis and synthesis. So I would recommend that you check out those videos. Another way to learn what the College Board is looking for in terms of sophistication is to actually read the essays on their website from 2018 and 2019 that were rescored with the 6-point rubric. So I like to have my students look at the ones that earned a 6, like a 141, and also essays that earned a 5, either because it was a 140, so it didn't get the sophistication point, or a 131, so it was missing a point in evidence and commentary. You're actually going to have 2 documents. The essays will be in one document and the scoring commentary will be in the other. It's important to know what they're looking for and to try to perhaps use it as a model. At the same time, you want to stay true to your own writing style. And I think it's important to recognize that the sophistication point is genuinely difficult to earn. Some people refer to it as the unicorn point, and I think there's actually some valid reasoning behind this. So what I tell my students is that I want them to understand what sophisticated writing is, but I don't expect them to write a sophisticated essay every time, because they're high school students. And this is a difficult class. Writing is a process. I actually majored in creative writing and I have my master's degree in it. The writer I was at 17 years old versus now are 2 totally different writers. So it's important to realize that sophistication is a good goal, but it's not the be all end all. In fact, a lot of times when my students actually try to go for that sophistication point, if they don't earn it, their essay is still better regardless, and usually it helps their commentary. So keep that in mind. It's nice to earn it, it's nice to strive for it, but you don't want to overly focus on it and stress yourself out too much, because quite frankly, you get more points for evidence and commentary anyway. Another really common question is, can I write about personal experience? So it depends on which essay you're talking about. It's not appropriate, in my opinion, to use personal pronouns in rhetorical analysis because you are not the intended audience of the passage. So you don't want to use pronouns like I or we or us because the writer or speaker presumably is not actually directing it at you. So if you're writing an argument essay or even a synthesis essay, though, it is possible that you could include personal experience. Now, when I started teaching high school English, honestly, it was kind of frowned upon to include personal experience. It was just not seen as, quite frankly, as valid as like historical evidence or something like that. However, I do believe that the opinion of this is changing, and it really depends on the prompt too, because if you can't come up with other examples, but you have personal experience that is relevant to the prompt and it demonstrates some sort of growth or meaningful change, then I say go for it. If you want more tips on this and you want to see some examples about how to write about personal experience effectively, I do have a video on my channel that goes more in depth, and I would love it if you would check that out. Many students seem to worry about pacing, and so I have some general tips that I give my own students that might help others as well. So first of all, play to your strengths and keep the rubric in mind. Remember that evidence and commentary accounts for 4 of the 6 points on each of the rubrics, so you really want to develop those body paragraphs. Also, you want to make sure that you have some sort of quick outline. I know some students don't like to do this, but I really do think it helps. You're just going to jot down some bullet points of your main ideas and other things you want to remember. This will help you hopefully not have as much writer's block, and if you're really stressed out, it'll help you remember what you intended to write about. So a very quick outline can be very helpful. Because of the stress of taking a standardized test like this, it can be very easy to lose track of time when you're writing these essays and to inadvertently spend more time than you perhaps intended on any one essay, compromising the amount of time you have left on the others. So just be mindful of your pacing as you're going. Also, if you're trying to save time, I recommend avoiding long introductory paragraphs. I personally think it's just better to have a couple sentences of context if possible, and then a thesis, because the long intros actually sort of detract from the rest of your essay in some sense. While we, as your teachers, want you to strive to do your very best on this exam, it's important to remember that these are rough drafts, because quite frankly, you've never seen these prompts before and you only had roughly 40 minutes to write each essay. So it is going to be stressful, and it's not necessarily going to be the same quality that you would produce if you had multiple days to do this, because obviously that's a very different pace. So be kind to yourself as you're going, and if it seems hard, don't let that throw you in the moment. Just buckle down, keep going, keep writing. You can do it.